A man stood near the grand entrance of the sprawling, sun-drenched estate. He was a black man, dressed in simple, clean clothes, a plain gray polo shirt and dark trousers that spoke of comfort, not of wealth. He observed the swirl of pastel dresses and sharp tuxedos, his expression calm, his presence unassuming. He could have been anyone, and that was precisely the point. But to the bride, a woman named Madison Whitmore, he could only be one thing, a problem. She saw him standing there, a dark, still figure against the bright, celebratory chaos, and her perfectly painted lips curled into a sneer. In her world, a world of carefully curated perfection and inherited status, anyone who didn't look the part didn't belong. She strode toward him, her white gown rustling like a furious whisper against the stone path. She didn't see a man. She saw an inconvenience, a stain on her perfect day. Without even a greeting, she snapped at him, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You! What are you doing here?" He didn't flinch. He simply met her gaze, his eyes steady. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch for the benefit of the nearby guests. "Security! Security! Get over here now!" Two guards hurried over, their expressions nervous. Madison pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the man. "I want him out. He doesn't belong here. Kick him out. Now!" The guests turned, their phones rising like a field of silver flowers, ready to capture the drama. They saw a ridiculously wealthy bride and a poor man who had clearly wandered into the wrong place. The man, Elias, remained calm. What none of them knew, what she could never imagine, was that he wasn't just a guest. He owned it all. The rolling green hills, the marble fountains, the grand mansion that served as the backdrop for her arrogant display, all of it belonged to him. He was the silent, unseen CEO of the massive holding company that had rented her this fantasy for the day. And as the security guards moved toward him, a plan was already forming in his mind. A storm was coming for Madison Whitmore. Soon the gates would open, and a fleet of black SUVs would arrive. A SWAT commander would step out, walk past the shocked bride, and snap a sharp, precise salute to the very man she was trying to throw out. In that moment, her world, built on a foundation of arrogance and prejudice, would shatter into a million pieces. Before we continue, comment your country, and if quiet power scares you more than loud power, hit like so more people see this. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Blackwood Manor, a name that echoed with old money and whispered power. It was the kind of place where champagne flowed like water, and the laughter of the guests felt both light and heavy, weighted with the knowledge of their own importance. Madison Whitmore, the bride at the center of this opulent universe, moved through the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom. Every detail was perfect, from the imported flowers cascading from marble urns to the string quartet playing softly in the background. Her world was a meticulously constructed stage, and she was its star. Her eyes, sharp and judgmental, scanned every corner, ensuring nothing was out of place. That's when she saw him. Near the VIP entrance, a man stood alone. He wasn't dressed like a guest. His clothes were simple, practical. He wasn't carrying a glass of champagne or engaging in polite conversation. He was just watching, his hands clasped behind his back, with an air of quiet contemplation that felt profoundly out of place amidst the performative joy. In Madison's binary world of haves and have-nots, he could only be staff, a janitor perhaps, or a groundskeeper who had wandered too far from his post, or worse, a trespasser who had somehow slipped past the gates. The thought sent a jolt of irritation through her. The audacity. On her day, she gestured sharply to her maid of honor. "Who is that?" she hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. Her friend squinted. "I don't know. Maybe he's with the catering company?" Madison's face tightened. "The catering staff wears uniforms. He looks like he just walked in off the street." Without another word, she marched toward him, her train sweeping across the pristine grass. The guests nearby fell silent, sensing a confrontation. It was better than the string quartet. "Excuse me," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "Can I help you?" Elias Carter turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers. There was no fear in his eyes, no deference, just a calm, unwavering stillness. This seemed to infuriate her more than anything. "You're not supposed to be here," she declared, her voice rising. "This is a private event, for guests only." Elias said nothing, simply maintaining eye contact. His silence was a canvas, and she was painting her own ugly portrait upon it. "Security!" she yelled, her voice echoing slightly in the open air. Two uniformed guards, hired for the event, jogged over, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. They recognized the bride, the woman paying their bills for the day. "This man," Madison said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger. "He's a trespasser. I want him escorted off the property immediately." The guards looked from the furious bride to the calm man. Something felt off. The man didn't look like a threat. He looked solid, grounded. One of the guards, a young man named Dave, took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, do you have an invitation?" Before Elias could answer, Madison cut him off. "An invitation? Look at him. Of course he doesn't have an invitation. Just get him out of here before he ruins the pictures." A ripple of snickers went through the nearby crowd. Phones were now openly recording. The little red dots a series of silent, judging eyes. The humiliation was the main event. Elias finally spoke, his voice low and even, carrying a weight that seemed to momentarily silence the world around them. "Are you sure?" That was all he said. Just 3 simple words. But in them lay a universe of meaning. A final chance for her to turn back from the cliff's edge. Madison let out a short, incredulous laugh. The sheer nerve of him. She tossed her hair back, a smirk playing on her lips as she looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his simple shoes. "Am I sure?" she repeated, savoring the moment, playing to her audience. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "I'm the bride. This is my wedding, my estate for the day. I decide who stays and who goes. And you," she finished, her voice rising back to a full-throated declaration, "are going." She turned her back on him, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal, and walked away, confident that the matter was settled. The guards looked at each other, then at Elias, their uncertainty growing. But the bride had given an order, and the crowd was watching. The situation was escalating, drawing more attention than the bride's grand entrance had an hour earlier. Karen Whitmore, Madison's mother, swept in like a hawk descending on its prey. She was a woman sculpted from disdain, her face a permanent mask of disapproval. She saw the scene, her daughter righteous and indignant, the security guards hesitant, and the common-looking man defiant in his stillness. "Madison, darling, what is all this commotion?" Karen asked, though she had clearly seen and heard everything. "Mother, this person," Madison spat the word out, "refuses to leave. He's ruining the atmosphere." Karen's eyes narrowed as she surveyed Elias Carter. She saw not a man, but a symbol of everything she felt was beneath her. She circled him slowly, as if inspecting a piece of faulty merchandise. "Well, you heard my daughter," she said, her voice laced with a cold, dismissive authority. "The uninvited help needs to be removed. We have standards here." The phrase uninvited help hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was designed to strip him of his dignity, to categorize and dismiss him in one fell swoop. The guests murmured in agreement, some nodding sagely, others simply enjoying the spectacle. Madison, emboldened by her mother's support, leaned in close to one of her bridesmaids and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "This is what happens when you let these types get too comfortable." The coded language was unmistakable. It wasn't just about his clothes or his presumed lack of an invitation. It was about who he was. Meanwhile, a young waitress named Lily Brooks was clearing glasses from a nearby table, trying to make herself invisible. But she saw everything. She saw the bride's cruelty, the mother's venom, and the crowd's casual, complicit laughter. And she saw the man at the center of it all. What struck her was not his supposed poverty, but his incredible composure. He stood there, absorbing their hatred, and his posture never wavered. His eyes never darted around in fear. He held a quiet authority that Madison, for all her shouting and posturing, could only dream of. Lily's heart ached. She knew what it was like to be looked down upon, to be treated as less than human by people who had never known a day of struggle. The security guards, Dave and his partner, were now in an impossible position. The bride was screaming at them, but their instincts were screaming something else. The man looked familiar. They couldn't place him, but there was something about his face, his bearing. He looked like someone important, trying not to look important. Their hesitation was fuel for Madison's fire. She spun around, her face a mask of rage. "What are you waiting for?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do your jobs. If he won't move, you're fired. I'll have the entire security team replaced by sundown. Do you understand me?" The threat hung heavy in the air. For the guards, it was a choice between their gut feeling and their paycheck. Reluctantly, Dave took another step forward, placing a hand gently on Elias's arm. "Sir, please," he said, his voice low. "Let's just avoid any more trouble." Elias looked down at the hand on his arm, and for the first time a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He didn't resist. He simply allowed them to begin guiding him away from the main area, his steps slow and deliberate. To the crowd, it was a victory for the bride. The trash had been taken out. But Lily, watching from the sidelines, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This wasn't the end of the story. She felt it in her bones. It was just the beginning. The narrative shifts, pulling back from the sunlit drama of the wedding to the cool, quiet halls of power. The man they saw as a janitor was, in reality, Elias Carter, the founder and CEO of Carter Holdings, a global conglomerate with a valuation that dwarfed the economies of several small countries. His empire was built not on inherited wealth, but on a foundation of relentless innovation and strategic genius. Carter Holdings was a silent giant, its tentacles reaching into every corner of modern life. They owned cutting-edge tech companies that developed secure communication systems. They held major multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Pentagon, designing proprietary software that protected national security infrastructure. Their real estate division, a smaller but incredibly lucrative arm of the company, acquired unique, high-value properties across the globe. Castles in Scotland, private islands in the Caribbean, and sprawling historic estates like Blackwood Manor. Elias had purchased Blackwood Manor just 6 months ago, not through a public sale, but through a quiet, discreet transaction handled by one of his subsidiary companies, Viridian Properties. The name Carter was nowhere on the deed. It was his way of keeping his acquisitions private, away from the prying eyes of the media and business rivals. The manor wasn't just an investment, it was a personal project. He appreciated its history, its architecture, and its serene beauty. When the Whitmore family's wedding planner had reached out to Viridian Properties to rent the venue, the request had eventually crossed his desk. He'd approved it, as he did with dozens of similar requests for his properties. But this one had piqued his interest. He had heard whispers about the Whitmore family's reputation for arrogance and their ostentatious displays of wealth. So he decided to do something he often did. He decided to observe. He chose to attend the event undercover, dressed not as a billionaire CEO, but as a simple, ordinary man. It was a test, a social experiment he conducted from time to time. He wanted to see how people treated others when they believed there were no cameras, no consequences, and no power in the room to hold them accountable. He wanted to measure the true character of the people who used his properties, the people who moved through his world. Today, Madison and Karen Whitmore were giving him a very clear, very ugly measurement. They had no idea that the man they were humiliating was the very person who held the power to grant or deny their access to this world of luxury they so desperately coveted. As the guards led him toward a side path, away from the prying eyes of the guests, a cold, calculated calm settled over Elias. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. And now he was resolved. Elias Carter's philosophy was simple and deeply ingrained, forged in the fires of his past. He believed that true power never needed to announce itself. Shouting was a sign of weakness, a desperate plea for recognition. True strength, he knew, was silent. It was the calm in the center of the storm, the unseen hand that moved the pieces on the board. This belief wasn't just a business strategy. It was a personal code, born from a lifetime of being underestimated. He had grown up in a world that judged him on sight, that made assumptions based on the color of his skin and the simplicity of his clothes. He remembered with crystal clarity a moment from his early 20s. He had just secured his first major investment for his fledgling tech startup. Filled with pride and a sense of accomplishment, he had walked into a high-end restaurant to celebrate. The host had taken one look at his simple jacket and jeans and directed him to the service entrance, assuming he was there to make a delivery. The sting of that humiliation had never left him. But instead of letting it turn into bitterness, he had transformed it into a tool. He had learned that people's true selves are revealed in how they treat those they perceive to have no power. This was why he conducted his silent tests. He would visit his own company's offices dressed as a maintenance worker, his hotel lobbies as a tourist, and now his own estate as a nondescript guest. He watched, he listened, and he learned. He saw which managers treated the cleaning staff with respect and which ones spoke down to them. He saw which employees were diligent when they thought no one was watching. And he saw which clients, like the Whitmores, wore their wealth like a weapon, using it to bludgeon and belittle anyone they deemed lesser. He had remained silent during Madison's tirade for a very specific reason. He was giving her rope. He wanted to see how far she would go, how much venom she would spew when faced with no resistance. He wanted her to reveal her entire character, not just for him to see, but for everyone to see. Each insult, each condescending glance, each shriek of entitlement was a piece of evidence. He was allowing her to build the case against herself. He had given her a simple, quiet out. "Are you sure?" It was an offer of grace, a chance to reconsider, to choose kindness over cruelty. She had not only refused it, she had laughed at it. And in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. Now, as he walked away from the jeering crowd, he wasn't retreating. He was moving to a better strategic position. The time for observation was over. The time for a response was about to begin. Lily Brooks felt a knot of anger and shame tighten in her stomach. She watched the man being led away, his back straight, his dignity intact despite the public stripping he had just endured. Then her eyes fell on a small table near the gardens where a family was seated. They were one of the few black families in attendance, guests of the groom. A young boy, no older than 10, was staring at the scene, his eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. He had seen a man who looked like him, like his father, being treated like dirt, and the injustice of it was reflected on his small face. In that moment, something inside Lily snapped. She couldn't be a silent bystander anymore. Her job was just a job. Her integrity was everything. She had to do something, even if it was small. She looked around, and her gaze landed on Tom Hall, the estate's chief of security. He wasn't one of the hired event guards. He was permanent staff, a man with a quiet, watchful presence. She had seen him earlier, observing the confrontation from a distance, his face unreadable but his posture rigid. He was pretending to be just another security lead, but Lily sensed he was more. With her tray of empty glasses still in hand, she made her way over to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to be careful. She couldn't afford to be fired. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Tom Hall turned to her, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Yes?" "That man," Lily said, nodding in the direction Elias had been taken. "The one the bride just had removed. This doesn't feel right. He wasn't doing anything wrong." She expected to be dismissed, to be told to mind her own business and get back to work. But Tom Hall's expression didn't change. He simply held her gaze for a long moment, as if assessing her. Then he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "You're right, it isn't," he said, his voice a low rumble. He then leaned in slightly, his next words meant for her alone. "Just wait." The two words were a promise and a warning. They sent a shiver down Lily's spine, a mix of fear and a strange, thrilling sense of anticipation. She didn't understand what he meant, but she understood that he was on the man's side. She wasn't the only one who saw the injustice. Tom Hall knew something she didn't. He knew that the balance of power at this wedding was about to shift, dramatically and irrevocably. Lily nodded, a silent bond of understanding passing between them. She walked back toward the service area, her steps lighter than before. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew she had made the right choice. She had spoken up, and in doing so, had aligned herself with a force she was only just beginning to comprehend. The security guards, following Madison's orders, escorted Elias not off the property but to a secluded stone patio hidden from the main celebration by a row of tall, sculpted hedges. It was a place for staff to take a break, out of sight and out of mind. They assumed he would leave from a service exit. "You should probably go, sir," Dave said, his tone now more apologetic than authoritative. "The bride is, well, she's having a day." Elias simply nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just stepped aside, allowing them to believe they had done their job. The guards exchanged a look, then turned and walked back toward the wedding, their duty fulfilled. But Elias did not leave. He stood on the stone patio, the faint sounds of the string quartet drifting over the hedges, and pulled out his phone. It was a simple, unassuming device, with no flashy case. He opened a secure messaging app, his thumb moving with practiced speed. He typed a single coded phrase into a conversation with a contact labeled only as enforcer. The message was short and chillingly precise. "Engage Protocol Whitmore." He hit send. Miles away, the phone of Jordan Myers, Elias Carter's chief of corporate security and his most trusted enforcer, buzzed with the notification. She saw the message and her entire demeanor shifted. Protocol Whitmore was not a standard procedure. It was a contingency plan Elias had created specifically for this event, a silent what-if scenario. It meant the client had crossed a line of disrespect so profound that it required an immediate and overwhelming response. It activated a chain of command that bypassed normal channels and engaged a high-level security response team, one usually reserved for protecting Carter Holdings' most sensitive assets. Back at the wedding, Tom Hall, the estate's security chief, felt a vibration in his pocket. He glanced at his own device. He had received a one-word alert from Jordan Myers. Engaged. A cold professionalism washed over him. He straightened his tie, his easygoing demeanor vanishing, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned security professional. Everything had just changed. The game was afoot. He subtly touched his earpiece, speaking in a low, clipped tone. "All stations, Phase 1. Secure the perimeter. No one in or out without my direct authorization. Acknowledge." Across the sprawling estate, a dozen other plainclothes security officers, loyal not to the wedding party but to Elias Carter, received the message. They began to move with quiet purpose, their movements so discreet that the laughing, champagne-sipping guests would never notice. The trap was being set, the cage door was swinging shut. And Madison Whitmore, the arrogant queen in her white dress, was celebrating her petty victory, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to be systematically dismantled. With the problem removed, Madison felt a surge of triumphant power. She glided back to her bridesmaids, who were gathered near the fountain, eager to hear the details of her conquest. She accepted a fresh glass of champagne, her smile wide and self-satisfied. "You see," she announced, her voice bright and brittle. "That's how it's done. You have to put the help in their place early or they'll walk all over you." Her friends giggled and nodded, their faces a mixture of admiration and sycophantic agreement. "You were amazing, Maddie," one of them gushed. "Totally iconic." Karen Whitmore joined the circle, placing a proprietary hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She gets it from me," Karen said with a proud sniff. "This is precisely why some people shouldn't be allowed inside elite venues. It lowers the tone for everyone. They simply don't know how to behave." The conversation was a performance of their own superiority, a way of reinforcing the invisible walls that separated them from the rest of the world. Most of the guests nodded along, eager to stay in the good graces of the bride and her formidable mother. But not everyone was comfortable. The groom, Brandon Whitmore, stood slightly apart from the group, his smile strained. He had watched the entire confrontation, a knot of unease twisting in his gut. He didn't like public scenes. He didn't like the way Madison's voice had turned so sharp and cruel. He had tried to catch her eye, to give her a small shake of his head, but she had been too caught up in her own drama to notice. Now he felt a vague sense of dread. Something about the man she had kicked out. His calmness had been unsettling. It felt less like the fear of a trespasser and more like the patience of a predator. Brandon took a sip of his champagne, trying to wash away the bad taste in his mouth. He loved Madison, but he was often a passenger in the powerful current of her personality. He chose his battles carefully, and challenging her in front of her mother and all their guests was not a battle he was willing to fight. So he stayed quiet, his silence a form of passive complicity. He hoped the incident would be forgotten, a minor blip in an otherwise perfect day. He couldn't have been more wrong. Madison, high on her own perceived authority, decided to immortalize the moment. She pulled out her phone, a jewel-encrusted device that cost more than Lily's monthly rent. She opened her favorite social media app and quickly composed a new story for her thousands of followers. She snapped a glamorous selfie, her head tilted just so. The chaotic wedding scene blurred artfully in the background. The caption was short, flippant, and designed for maximum engagement from her privileged echo chamber. It read, "Just had to kick someone out at my own wedding, # protect the vibe, # bridezilla, # worth it." She hit post, a smug smile on her face. The likes and heart-eyed emojis began pouring in almost instantly. "You go, girl," one comment read. "Queen behavior," said another. She was being celebrated for her cruelty, her bad behavior repackaged as an empowering act of protecting her vibe. Lily Brooks, on a short break in the staff tent, saw the post pop up on her phone. A friend had sent her a screenshot, knowing she was working the event. The sight of it made her feel physically ill. The laughing emoji, the flippant hashtags, it was a public celebration of the humiliation she had just witnessed. It was proof that for Madison and her circle, other people weren't real. They were just props or obstacles in the movie of their own lives. She felt a renewed surge of anger, but also a strange sense of vindication for her earlier choice to speak to Tom Hall. At that very moment, Tom Hall was standing discreetly near the main gate, his back to the party. A silent ping buzzed in his earpiece, a direct audio feed from Jordan Myers. The voice was calm, clipped, and all business. "Asset is secure. Response team is mobile. ETA 6 minutes. Tom Hall didn't reply. He didn't need to. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the long tree-lined driveway that led to the estate. 6 minutes. In 6 minutes, the world of Madison Whitmore would come crashing down. The digital laughter of her online followers would fade, replaced by a silence so profound it would haunt her for the rest of her life. The clock was ticking. Elias Carter remained on the secluded patio, a ghost at the feast. He could still hear the distant music and the waves of laughter from the party, a world away. He had sent the text. The protocol was engaged. Now he made one final brief call. He dialed a number from memory, a direct and encrypted line. A voice answered on the first ring, professional and alert. "Yes, sir." Elias spoke with an economy of words that conveyed absolute authority. "Activate high security. Full clearance arrival." That was it. He didn't need to explain who he was, what the situation was, or what he required. The person on the other end understood everything. "Acknowledged, sir. Activating now." The call lasted no more than 5 seconds. He ended it and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His part in this initial phase was done. Now he would simply wait and watch the consequences unfold. Tom Hall had already begun his work. The moment he received the ETA, he started coordinating his men. His communication was discreet, a series of hand signals and low-frequency radio chatter that was indecipherable to outsiders. "Alpha Team, secure the West Gate. Bravo, East Gate. No one leaves. I repeat, no one leaves the property," he murmured into his wrist communicator. "Charlie Team, interior positions. Eyes on the bride and her mother. Non-confrontational surveillance only." His men, who had been mingling among the staff and guests, peeled away from their positions with practiced ease. One, who had been posing as a valet, calmly placed a temporarily closed sign at the end of the driveway. Another, dressed as a gardener, moved to secure a rear service entrance. The net was tightening, slowly and silently. The guests, however, were beginning to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The security presence, once a relaxed and almost invisible backdrop, had become more pronounced. Men in dark suits spoke into their wrists with a new urgency. A few guests saw the main gate being closed and murmured to one another. A frisson of unease, a faint but growing hum of anxiety began to spread through the crowd. "What's going on?" a woman whispered to her husband. "Did you see that? They just locked the gate." Her husband shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "Probably just a security drill. Nothing to worry about." But he too felt a prickle of alarm. This was not normal. Something was happening, something that was not on the wedding program. The wedding coordinator, a harried woman with a clipboard and a perpetual look of panic, was the first official to sense that control was slipping from her grasp. She saw Tom Hall directing his men with an authority that far exceeded his role as a simple estate security chief. She rushed over to him, her face flushed. "Mr. Hall, what is all this? You're making the guests nervous. Is there a problem?" Tom Hall turned to her, his expression polite but firm, his eyes like chips of ice. "There is a venue issue we are handling, ma'am. Please ask your clients to remain in the main reception area." His tone left no room for argument. Realizing she was out of her depth, the coordinator scurried away to find the one person she believed was in charge: the bride. She found Madison holding court by the champagne tower, basking in the glow of her recent social media post. "Madison," the coordinator said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. There's a security team incoming. They said something about a venue issue." Madison waved a dismissive hand, annoyed at the interruption. "A venue issue? On my wedding day? How unprofessional. Tell them to wait." Karen, who overheard the exchange, let out a derisive laugh. "Honestly, the nerve of some people. Let them wait outside the gates until we're finished. The Whitmore wedding does not pause for minor inconveniences." Madison nodded in agreement, a smug look on her face. She turned to the coordinator, her voice dripping with the arrogance of someone who has never been told no. "You heard my mother. Go back and tell them that I own this place today. They will wait for me." The coordinator swallowed hard. She looked from the supremely confident bride to the increasingly tense security situation at the gates. She had a terrible feeling that Madison Whitmore did not, in fact, own this place today. She had a feeling that the person who did was about to make their presence known in a way no one would ever forget. The first sound was a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It grew steadily, resolving into the distinct thrum of multiple powerful engines. Heads began to turn. Conversations faltered. The string quartet, sensing the shift in mood, trailed off into an uncertain silence. And then they appeared. Cresting the hill at the end of the long, winding driveway was a fleet of vehicles that belonged more to a presidential motorcade than a weekend wedding. At the front were 3 menacing blacked-out SUVs, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun like obsidian mirrors. Following closely behind them were two larger, more imposing vehicles, clearly marked with the unmistakable block letters, SWAT. They moved with a speed and purpose that was terrifying. The guests, who had been laughing and sipping champagne moments before, now rushed to the edge of the lawn, their faces a mixture of confusion, excitement, and fear. Phones came out again, but this time, the mood was not one of amusement. This was serious. Whispers erupted throughout the crowd. "Is it a police raid? Did someone call the police? What on earth is going on?" The groom's uncle, a corporate lawyer who thought he had seen everything, leaned over to his wife and muttered, his face pale. "This isn't local police. This is federal level. Someone big is involved." Madison, however, saw the arrival not as a threat, but as the final, glorious act of her little drama. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. She was convinced they were here for him. The trespasser. She imagined he must have been more than just a vagrant. He must have been some kind of professional agitator, someone so dangerous that a full SWAT team was needed to remove him. This was perfect. It validated her actions completely. It made her look not like a bully, but like a hero who had protected her guests from a hidden danger. She turned to her mother, her eyes gleaming with vindictive delight. "See, Mother? I told you he was a problem. They must have sent the cavalry to deal with him." Karen preened, patting her daughter's arm. "You were right, my darling. You always are. You have excellent instincts." Brandon, the groom, felt a fresh wave of nausea. This was spiraling out of control. SWAT teams didn't show up for simple trespassing. This was something else entirely. Something big and something very, very bad. He watched as the vehicles screeched to a halt on the gravel driveway, doors opening in unison. Men in tactical gear emerged, their movements sharp and efficient. But they didn't storm the party. They took up positions, forming a secure perimeter. They were not here to arrest. They were here to protect. The doors of the lead SUV opened. Out stepped a man in a crisp, dark suit, Jordan Myers, her face a mask of cold professionalism. But all eyes were on the man who emerged from the SWAT vehicle. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate, his face etched with the calm authority of a seasoned commander. This was Captain Reeves. He surveyed the scene for a brief moment, his gaze sweeping over the gawking, terrified wedding guests. He saw Madison standing there with her smug, expectant smile, and he walked right past her without a second glance, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Madison's smile faltered. This wasn't going according to her script. The captain's boots crunched on the gravel as he strode across the lawn, his unit fanning out behind him. He walked with a purpose that silenced the entire crowd. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind and the frantic beating of 100 hearts. He walked toward the secluded stone patio, the place where the trespasser had been sent, and then he stopped. Elias Carter stepped out from behind the hedges, emerging from the shadows into the full light of the afternoon sun. He was still dressed in his simple polo shirt and trousers. He looked completely out of place next to the heavily armed SWAT commander. The crowd held its collective breath. What was going to happen? Was this the arrest? Madison watched, her fists clenched, waiting for the man to be thrown to the ground. But that is not what happened. Captain Reeves halted directly in front of Elias. He stood at attention, his back ramrod straight. And then, in a move that sent a shockwave of pure, unadulterated disbelief through the entire wedding party, he snapped his right hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. The sound of his gloved hand hitting the brim of his cap cracked through the dead silence like a gunshot. His voice, clear and ringing with absolute respect, echoed across the lawn. "Sir," he declared, "your orders?" The world stopped. A chilling, absolute silence fell over the crowd. Champagne glasses slipped from numb fingers and shattered on the stone pathways. Phones, which had been recording every moment, clattered to the ground as hands went limp with shock. Jaws literally dropped. The collective gasp of 200 people was a single, unified sound of astonishment. In that one simple gesture, a salute from a SWAT commander to a man they had all dismissed as a nobody, the entire social order of the day was not just upended. It was obliterated. Madison Whitmore stood frozen, the color draining from her face. The smug, triumphant look was gone, replaced by a mask of horrified confusion. The man she had mocked, the man she had called help, the man she had ordered to be kicked out, was being saluted by a SWAT commander. It was impossible. It was inconceivable. It was happening. The world seemed to move in slow motion. The SWAT team, with disciplined precision, moved to block all the entrances and exits to the main reception area. They weren't aggressive. They were simply an immovable human wall. The message was clear. No one was going anywhere. Jordan Myers, Elias's corporate enforcer, stepped forward, her heels clicking ominously on the flagstone path. She held a leather-bound portfolio in her hands. She approached the wedding coordinator, who looked like she was about to faint. "I am Jordan Myers, Executive Vice President of Carter Holdings," she announced, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. She then turned her gaze to the Whitmore family, who were huddled together in a state of shock. Her eyes settled on Madison. "This property, Blackwood Manor, is a private asset under the exclusive ownership of a subsidiary of Carter Holdings." She paused, letting the words sink in. Lily Brooks, who was standing near the service tent, gasped. The name Carter Holdings was legendary. It was a name whispered with reverence in the worlds of finance and technology. And suddenly everything clicked into place. The man's quiet confidence. Tom Hall's cryptic, "Just wait." The overwhelming security response. It all made a terrifying, perfect sense. Madison's mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. "Carter Holdings?" she stammered, her voice a reedy, pathetic version of its former self. "No, that's not possible. We rented this venue from a company called Viridian Properties." Jordan Myers gave a small, cold smile. "Viridian Properties is one of our many subsidiaries, created for the sole purpose of managing Mr. Carter's private real estate portfolio, a fact that a simple background check would have revealed had you bothered to do one." She opened the portfolio, revealing the top page of a document, the deed, and at the bottom the signature was clear, bold, and unmistakable. Elias Carter. "Ma'am," Jordan said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "he owns this estate. He owns the land you're standing on, the air you're breathing. He owns everything." Madison's eyes darted from the document to Elias, who was now walking slowly toward them, Captain Reeves a respectful half-step behind him. The man in the simple polo shirt was transformed. She was no longer seeing a janitor. She was seeing a king she had tried to banish from his own castle. The full, crushing weight of her mistake landed on her like a physical blow. Her arrogance, her prejudice, her casual cruelty, it had all been directed at one of an impossibly powerful man. The consequences were swift and brutal. Captain Reeves stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Karen and Madison. "Ma'am," he said, his voice formal and devoid of sympathy, "you have been recorded verbally harassing and attempting to illegally eject the owner of this property. All footage from the estate's security cameras has been logged and archived. This wasn't just a social embarrassment. It was now a legal matter." Karen Whitmore turned a shade of pale white that clashed horribly with her expensive mother-of-the-bride dress. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. All her life she had used her social standing as a shield. But that shield had just been vaporized. Elias Carter finally stood before them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet words landed with the force of a judge's gavel. He looked at Jordan Myers, Freeze all payment channels associated with the Whitmore family's event contract. The rental fee, the security deposit, all of it is forfeit due to breach of conduct. He then looked at Tom Hall. The Whitmore family, and any of their known associates, are to be permanently banned from any and all Carter venues, hotels, and properties worldwide, effective immediately. The words were like hammer blows, each one dismantling a piece of their social standing. Madison felt her knees begin to buckle. The world she had so carefully constructed, the world where her name and money opened every door, was shrinking before her very eyes. She had been publicly and permanently blacklisted by one of the most powerful men on the planet. Then Elias did something no one expected. He turned his head and his eyes scanned the crowd of staff until they found Lily Brooks. "Miss Brooks," he called out, his voice now carrying a warmth that had been absent before. Lily froze, terrified. She thought she was about to be fired for speaking to security. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands trembling. Elias gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Your name is Lily Brooks, correct? Tom Hall informed me that you were the only person here today who showed basic human decency. You spoke up when you saw an injustice." He looked at Jordan. "Miss Myers, please arrange a meeting with Miss Brooks for tomorrow morning. I'm offering her a full-time position in our hospitality management division, a position with a full scholarship to complete her degree and a salary that reflects her character." In front of everyone, the snickering guests, the arrogant bride, her venomous mother, Elias Carter had elevated the humble waitress. He was showing them what he valued. Not wealth, not status, but integrity. Madison stared, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and envy. The waitress she hadn't even deigned to look at was being given a future, a career, a life-changing opportunity, while her own perfect day, her perfect life, lay in ruins at her feet. The humiliation was absolute. The justice was poetic. The rest of the wedding dissolved into a silent, humiliating retreat. There was no music, no celebration, no champagne. The staff, under Tom Hall's direction, began to quietly and efficiently pack everything away. The guests, avoiding eye contact with the bride and her family, scurried to their cars, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of failure. Madison Whitmore, the queen of a shattered kingdom, was escorted off the property by the very security she had threatened to fire. Her white dress, once a symbol of her triumph, now looked like a funeral shroud. Her face was streaked with ruined mascara, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and shame. Her fairy tale had ended in a public nightmare, a story that would be whispered in elite circles for years to come. Her social media post, once a badge of honor, was now a digital monument to her own spectacular downfall. Lily Brooks left the estate that day not as a temporary waitress, but as a woman with a new future. She walked down the long driveway, the offer from Elias Carter echoing in her mind. It felt surreal, like a dream. But it was real. Her small act of courage, her simple refusal to stay silent in the face of cruelty, had changed the entire course of her life. As the last of the cars disappeared down the road, Elias Carter walked the grounds of his estate alone. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. A peaceful quiet had settled over the manor. He breathed in the cool evening air, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. He had not sought this confrontation, but he had not shied away from it. He had allowed people to show him who they truly were, and they had. In the end, it was a simple, timeless lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The janitor you mock may own the building. The guest you disrespect may control your future. Real power? The kind that endures, the kind that truly matters, moves in silence. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.